Before we start, we are both, Stephen is here. My name is Shree. I'm one of the solution architect in VCF division. Stephen.
I am the VCF architect for automation, and historically I have been the VCD guy, the VMware Cloud Director guy. So I've switched into a new role, but the outcome is the same, a private cloud.
Thank you. Before we start, let me ask a few questions and then we go over the agenda. So how many of you guys know VCF 9 so far? Any? Okay. And VCF automation? Okay, quite few. Any plan for you guys to deploying or trying out VCF 9 so far? In the lab? Or, okay. So the reason I ask this question will use some of the VCF 9 concept like VCF fleet, VCF instance, management domain, workload domain. Will not go in detail those topics. However, it is a morely focused on VCF automation. But I just wanted to make sure that when you talk about those things in the context of VCF 9, those terminology will come up, okay? And we'll definitely take a follow-up questions after the presentation or after the session, if there is no time to answer any questions in 45-minute session, but we'll try our best to address all your questions. So let's get it started. So Stephen, over to you.
Sure. Just let this settle for a minute while some folks filter in. All right, so today in 45 minutes, we're going to try and do justice to designing and architecting a private cloud using VCF automation. This is kind of the rough agenda. We have more content than time, I think, which is a good thing. If you have questions, we'll generally take them at any time, but we may postpone the full answer because we might want to cover that in a couple slides. So VCF automation is really about bringing a private cloud on-prem, okay, or a public cloud experience on premises. And there are several qualities that we find very important to that experience. Self-service, modern concepts, and multi-tenancy. And there's different facets of each one of those that we can talk about. But together they have been stitched together into a singular private cloud experience that you can offer to end users who need to provision IT resources. If you are the VCF admin, then these concepts here allow you to administer VCF with confidence that you're not going to disturb too much your end users, right? Part of VCF automation is creating this consumption experience that is separate from the administrative experience of dealing with data stores and host clusters and vCenters and networks, okay? And once we have that separation, we can start to bring in modern services in addition to the baseband services that you're all probably familiar with, VMs, Kubernetes clusters, networks like VPC, storage volumes, okay? Then you can go up and be more complicated than just those primitives with application blueprints, where you can stitch together all of those constructs into an application that is deployed repeatedly through a catalog or as part of a DevOps workflow. And then if you really are committed and sophisticated in your deployment for this private cloud, you can host different tenants who have competing interests. Today in one of the sessions, if you're a regulated industry, you can host the buy side and the sell side and financial industry on the same infrastructure and keep their people, processes, and workloads completely isolated. And if you don't have that need for multi-tenancy, well then at the very least you can have one large tenant which you manage or someone else manages all of the workloads, but their activities are kept separate from your activities as an admin, right? There's this idea that we're trying to keep the personas productive, isolated, and able to focus on their use cases and not disturb all the others. Whether that's two tenants working on the same infrastructure or one tenant and their administrative staff working together on the infrastructure. And so there are many different paths to this private cloud experience, right? If you are a vSphere customer and you know and love vCenter, our expectation is that you'll transform into a cloud admin from a vSphere admin. When your teams come to you and say, hey, I have this workflow that I want to develop, or this application I want to deploy or integrate, there's this public cloud thing that I could do. Can I host it on your infrastructure? We want to empower you to say, yes, we've got a solution for you with our runtimes and services that we're going to develop as part of this private cloud experience. If you're an ARIA automation customer, well, we've got you covered because we've taken, as you'll see, the best parts of ARIA automation and we put them into VCF automation. And so that's where these blueprints and catalog come from. And if you're a Cloud Director customer, near and dear to my heart for the last 20 years, we've got you covered too, because the concepts of tenancy, tenant separation, provider tenant separation, content distribution across tenants, and having a tailored experience between tenant one and tenant two, we have that covered. And we've made simplifications for the folks who don't want that. So we've kind of built on what was historically VCD's strong suit, and we've integrated into a VCF experience. And so you see on the right-hand slide there, that diagram, hopefully you're seeing that repeated in a lot of the VCF automation content, because that is the summary slide of all the concepts that we're introducing as part of our 9.0 offering. So a little bit about how we got here, right? This was a massive engineering undertaking to take 3 properties inside of the division and bring them together in a cohesive way with, really taking the best parts of each and integrating them so that they can flourish as part of VCF automation. So at the top, you see we have multiple tenants. They're sitting on top of ARIA automation, which internally we call, and you'll see these architecture diagrams, we call the tenant portal. And so this is the consumption experience, the starting point for the iconic consumption experience that the private cloud on VCF is going to offer. And below that, we have a Cloud Director, or the technology that was formerly in the Cloud Director product, form the basis of our tenancy engine, allowing you to segment your infrastructure into discrete pieces safely, securely, and manage your overcommitment ratios between different competing interests. And then what's new, we've tried to do this before with ARIA automation, we tried to do this before with Cloud Director, and they always introduced abstractions that took you away from the value of the core platform. Very often there'd be a new feature about how the hypervisor works or interacts with virtual machines, and if you were an ARIA automation customer or a Cloud Director customer, you had to wait for those teams to figure out how to plumb that through so that you could take advantage of it. If you're just a vSphere customer, you got it as soon as it was released, but maybe you didn't know how to operationalize it safely, and so you had to do some homework there. Well, what's new with VCF automation is we've taken the platform elements for storage, network, and compute, and through the combination of the tenant portal and tenant manager elements of VCF automation, we've made them safe for multi-tenant provider consumption. Right? So as we bring value and innovation at the VM layer, the core VM layer, that's going to immediately shine through as you upgrade your hosts and vCenters and workload domains, right? So, I've been doing this at VMware, now Broadcom, for about 19 years. And this is the first time we're able to confidently say that when we ship something at the core platform, all the way through the stack, you're going to see that benefit immediately in our experience. And we've also gone one step further and say, Well, that's great. You can make all those consumption use cases work, but how do I monitor it? How do I, the consumer, understand what my workload is doing on the hypervisors, on the infrastructure, but not reveal anything about how those hypervisors and how the storage networks and NSX networks that are provider side are configured? Because we don't want to leak any provider information, we don't want to leak any tenant information to the developers and application owners. And so what we've done is, just like with the vSphere supervisor component, we've made a multi-tenant safe integration with VCF operations that allows end users to see the core virtual machine and Kubernetes cluster and storage and networking metrics of their workloads. Okay, and we've done that in a tenant fashion. So you can go to the operations console as an admin and you can see for tenant A or tenant B, you can see what it is they're consuming and how they're consuming. And then those individual tenants can get their view from VCF Automation's portal. We also have chargeback integration if that's a use case. So this comes up a lot in the cloud service provider market, but we've also taken the steps and time to integrate the chargeback component of VCF operations so that you as the provider can put in cost and rate policies and the tenants can see the pricing and cost structure of the workloads as they're consuming and provisioning. So this is a high-level summary of what a tenant is going to see. So on the left, there's a catalog of services, which is an open-ended catalog. I've just picked some of the core services that are important to talk about. VM, Kubernetes, storage, the volume service, network service, and database service. We view VCF Automation as a true private cloud, and a private cloud, like a public cloud, has a vast array of services that are consumed in order to do interesting work. Right? I mean, every application these days has some sort of database attached to it, and so we have a database service. There are VMs, there are Kubernetes clusters running these applications. Well, we have those services too, as you might expect. On the right-hand side, you see two boxes. The top box is really about the tenant and what the tenant sees. We call that object an organization. But inside of that organization, there are projects, which are another form of tenancy, that allow the different groups within whatever structure, corporate structure we're talking about, to have an isolated set of workloads and management capacity. Those projects aggregate these things called vSphere namespaces, which are, if you're unfamiliar with the supervisor in vSphere, you can think of a namespace as a very extremely fancy resource pool or set of resource pools. And so we've taken that as our token construct that all these services integrate, interoperate against. So as you provision any kind of workload or any kind of service element, the namespace is the thing that stitches all of that together and surfaces those concepts to the end user as they provision. And all of that capacity that's been aggregated by the provider is delegated to a tenant in the form of a regional quota, right? So a regional quota is our construct for describing the capabilities or the set of resources that a particular tenant can consume from within a region. And a region is a set of aggregated resources that you put together based on whatever qualities you find important that you then delegate to a particular set of tenants. And you can be as sophisticated or simple in describing your aggregated set of resources as your use cases require. And you can have many regions in your definition, because a region is nothing more than a set of host clusters that have been organized into vSphere zones, which is an availability construct describing what happens when one of those hosts fails and how that failure causes problems or not as it propagates up the stack into the workloads. And all of this is done in the context of one or more workload domains provisioned in VCF, in a VCF fleet. So I'm going to walk you through what it's like as an admin to build out a provider side and then a tenant side set of regions and resources. So at the core we have, or at the base we have workload domains with vSphere clusters, which you all should hopefully be familiar with. We've had these for a long time in VCF. But now we're adding this concept called a supervisor, and we're taking those clusters and we're putting them into vSphere zones. This allows the infrastructure to smartly reason about how those host clusters are organized and eventually translate into a vSphere namespace and the resource pools that the namespace uses to land and schedule workloads on the hypervisors. And from there, we take one or more supervisors and we put them into a region. So this diagram is a simplification. A region can span many supervisors as long as the networking domain is the same. And so that usually means share the same NSX manager, because we want regions to be a fungible set of resources. As tenants create projects and create namespaces for those projects, the namespaces are going to be distributed throughout the region. And so we want to make sure that when the first namespace lands and the last namespace lands in a region, that the workloads share the same network characteristics, they share the same compute characteristics, they share the same storage characteristics, so that the consumers have predictable understanding of the performance and isolation of those workloads. And so a region is meant to be this aggregated pool of resources that you can plan out. You can have many regions, you can have few regions, but you'll have at least one region. And then once you have the region, it's up to you to decide how to delegate those resources. So here we're seeing tenants by way of an organization in blue and green being provisioned, right? So there's organization 1 in blue. And organization 1 has access to more than one region, okay? Region 1 and region 2. And organization 2 has access to only a single region. You can have hundreds, perhaps thousands of organizations if you're a cloud service provider. If you're an enterprise acting like a service provider, you can have hundreds or thousands. You can have just one organization that hosts all of the infrastructure for your IT staff. The point here is that once you have this common substrate, once you have these regions defined, you can be infinitely flexible with your core customer base. Same infrastructure, you could dedicate an entire region to a particular customer or consumer in your organization. You could take a region and massively oversubscribe it, like we do here at Broadcom, and share it amongst many different divisions. The choice is yours. You can go from one extreme to another, and you don't have to predetermine what you're going to do in how you allocate consumption. So now we'll talk a little bit about what the tenant administrative experience is like. So today in VCF automation, the expectation is that once an organization has been defined, the tenant admin of that organization has been contacted, they've been told what their regional quota or quotas are. It's now up to the tenant admin to define how those regional quotas are to be consumed. And the first course of action for the tenant admin is to decide, what are my projects? A project is just a meaningful grouping of users and resources and workloads to accomplish a particular task. So an example project might be development for some application that you're running. Another project might be production. A third project might be some test dev area for developers, right? Or it could be whatever you find important. But nevertheless, the idea is that once these projects are defined, we can start to allocate resources in the way of vSphere namespaces. And these namespaces can be as small or as large as required, and they can be as numerous as are required based on what is being deployed. And all of these namespaces are stitched together on the network by way of the VCF networking construct called a VPC. So there are different elements to a VPC, but essentially it's a very smart networking technology that allows multiple namespaces to communicate safely and securely. So you can have one namespace hosting a set of virtual machines, and that VPC can isolate those workloads on a particular subnet, and you can have another set of virtual machines on the same VPC on another subnet, and they can securely cooperate with each other over the network. And so now we're in a unique position as we build out a private cloud, right? So I'm showing you a behind the scenes, right? If you're the provider, there's a lot of complexity. If you're the tenant admin, there's a medium amount of complexity. But if you're a consumer, if all of this has been set up correctly and done well, you log in and you provision a virtual machine or a Kubernetes cluster or a VPC, or you administer a VPC if you're the network admin. Okay, and this is like what you see in the public cloud. You go to a public cloud console as a end user and you just provision stuff. I mean, sure, there's some administrative setup with accounts and projects like project objects, but fundamentally, all of the hard work has been done, and so you're left with just being a blissfully ignorant consumer of all of this fancy infrastructure. And so our objective with VCF automation and VCF in general for the private cloud experience to be the same. If you're an end user and you just want to deploy a workload, someone has figured all this stuff out and you just log in and deploy. Or fancy graphics here doing that. So I think Shree is going to come up and talk about how you get VCF automation. What are your choices? How that can be deployed inside of your VCF fleet. How many instances you can choose. There's a variety of choices that you can make to get to the same outcome. Shree?
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, a lot of good stuff. Okay, what is the path to go to VCF automation? Right, so you understand what Stephen mentioned. Let me talk about two paths. One is brownfield and greenfield, right? In terms of you are today in ARIA automation 8, you wanted to go to VCF automation, that is possible. You can upgrade ARIA automation and all your catalog, blueprints, VMs, everything will be ported over to VCF automation, right? And or you can go the greenfield way. You deploy a VCF, and then through VCF installer, when you deploy the VCF fleet, VCF automation will be deployed for you, and then you can do the consumption, whatever Stephen just mentioned. Now let's take a look. How do you design a VCF in terms of your tenancy requirement? There are multiple areas you can take a look, and there are multiple patterns where you think when you design an infrastructure layer. Like he mentioned 3 personas, right? One is provider admin or an enterprise IT admin who is basically carving out the resources of the entire infrastructure, right? Before even you go to the consumption layer, right? So that's what we're talking about here. So give an example, let's say use case, you have an organization with very smaller environment and pure resource requirement, and you wanted to set up an infrastructure for VCF automation to consume, right? In that case, maybe you need a single domain. You must have heard about consolidated architecture on 5.2 or before, right? So now we're talking about it's a single VCF instance which can have a management domain, and that management domain have a vCenter that can consume all your management component as well as your workload, right? You can deploy that way, but I'll talk about a little bit further on the design standpoint. I'm just giving a very summary slide here. And then we'll also have you have a customer who is talking about, oh, I am a CSP and I have multiple business units, or I have multiple tenants, and I wanted to segregate that, or I wanted to keep it in the same infrastructure, but I wanted to share that with multiple customers or multiple tenants, right? Similarly, you have another one, you want to dedicate it, maybe you have a compliance, security, and many other geo-specific requirement, and you wanted to dedicate a VCF instance or a compute for that specific requirement. And then you'll also have a VCF instance for organization. You basically now we're talking about distributed architecture where you wanted to have a different region specific VCF instance deployment where VCF automation can consume. The number 5, we talk about a VCF fleet with independent VCF automation. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. Let's skip that for architecture slide so that it'll give a more sense. So the first one I talked about, so this is one of the example, there's two options. One is on the left hand side, you see there's a management cluster, right? That's 4 node or 5 node, whatever, when you bring up a VCF automation, VCF 9, you will see a VCF fleet, first thing. So that's your VCF fleet. When VCF fleets comes out, you will see two main components, which is basically VCF operation and VCF automation. Management domain consists of SCTC manager, vCenter, NSX. You must have known that, right? On VCF 9, we introduced VCF fleet. So each fleet, when you say fleet, it one VCF operation and one VCF automation. So in that management domain construct, now you can utilize that management domain construct with a fleet, with your management component plus your workload components. So now VCF automation can see as, okay, this is a vCenter, I enable the supervisor, and then I can consume through my self-service portal, I can deploy on same cluster and on different namespaces, segregating my workloads on that cluster. So that's very simple design. You can scale or you can deploy for multiple clusters across the board. Now on the right hand side, that one I showed you on only one cluster. But think about on that architecture number 2, you have a vCenter. And the vCenter, you have one cluster which is dedicated for your management component. Now you have a multiple organization coming in. And now you wanted to give let's say, give an example, you have one organization for multiple business units, HR, finance, or something, right? You wanted to dedicate each cluster to them. And once you create those clusters for dedicated tenants, then you can expose the resources to VCF automation, and VCF automation give you another resource sharing mechanism and logical isolation on the top where you can place those customers. And security and compliance related requirement, whenever you have, you can segregate those things. So that's number 1 and 2, but this is one VCF instance with one vCenter, basically we're talking about, okay? And now this one, we talked about how you want to share it. Okay, now you got the idea of management domain, one VCF instance, one VCF fleet in the context of one VCF fleet. Now I'm introducing another one, is a workload domain. Okay, now that workload domain when you create, you can have a multiple business units, same analogy, let's say you have HR and finance and many other views. You wanted to give one cluster or one workload domain and multiple units are sharing the resources. However, I'm still getting my resource segmentation, logical isolation, starting from compute, network, and storage. So you can do that through VCF automation. And this is shared model, right? Now let's go look at a dedicated model. Now think about this way. You have a requirement that I wanted to have a separate hardware. Now GPU, let's say, you will not have GPU in every cluster, right? So give an example, one cluster is dedicated for a customer who is just using normal traditional workload or maybe a cloud native application and not requiring any GPU. However, another customer who is looking for a dedicated hardware, and that's a GPU sensitive workload. Now you may want to dedicate a workload domain for those customers, and then VCF automation can do another layer of logical separation on the top but associating to each cluster. Okay, so that's a dedicated model. Now let's go a little bit further. So now that all the design I talked about, 3 scenarios, these are all on one single VCF fleet and one VCF instance. Now let's talk about how you wanted to go a little bit further. Now you have a scale requirement, you have a geo-specific requirement, you have a compliance requirement, you have a security requirement, you have a merger and acquisition, you have a certain universities or something. There are many certain requirements. In that case, you have a requirement, okay, I have a lot of customer coming in, they want a dedicated hardware or dedicated setup in different regions. This is again same thing, one VCF fleet, but how do I scale it? Through VCF automation. So let's say on the left hand side you see one VCF fleet which consists of one VCF operation and VCF automation and bunch of workload domains. That's dedicated for, let's say, multiple customers or one BU, give an example, one enterprise. On the right-hand side, I can still create a VCF instance. The VCF instance can be consumable through VCF automation, but that VCF instance which I'm talking about, you can place it on a different region or different geo or different customers who is looking for entire stack of management and control plane in their control. So in this case, if you look at the other VCF instance, you can see a replica of SDDC Manager, vCenter, and SX Manager. This is not replica. These are a standalone instance of another VCF instance which is operating in their own independent environment. That means you have multiple instances. They're managed through one VCF operation fleet. However, they're locally present, they're independent, and all the operation, lifecycle management and everything they're doing locally. Okay? So now on one VCF automation, you can segregate your tenants, which region or which VCF instance that workload needs to go, right? You can have a complete logical segmentation around networking, compute, and your storage across the board. So that's one model, right? Now let's take a look at another one. This is the one I was talking about, the last 5 one, right? This is like basically dedicated fleet. So where exactly this will fit, right? So now give an example, let's say you have a service provider, you have a pretty SLA requirement. I don't want to share my hardware, I don't want to share my management layer, I don't want to share my data plane, control plane, nothing, right? All VCF automation component is consuming the hardware or infrastructure or the management component, everything. This should be one fleet. So now I'm talking about multiple fleets. So each fleet has a VCF automation. So now when I'm talking about one fleet has a VCF operation and fleet, now think about you have a customer, Coke and Pepsi, they want to manage their own operation and automation, and they don't want to share with any operation, licensing, management, and everything. Let's give an example. You have a one licensing requirement and other customer has a different licensing requirement. Or you are a CSP, you wanted to give certain component to one customer and they let them manage their own fleet. So in that scenarios, you can bring in multiple fleets and that fleet also scales similarly. However, the model is different. These are the couple of choices you have, how you create the tenancy for VCF automation to consume. Now let's take a look on deployment scenarios. You understood how the tenancy construct works. Now take a look, couple of scenarios on the deployment patterns, right? Not everything I'll cover few patterns how you will deploy VCF automation. So first thing is, like I talked about, most commonly CSPs and others, they want to deploy a one management domain where very specific small sector of customers are going to use workload and management on the same cluster. In that case, you have a choice that, okay, you can see this is very simple. If you are using vSphere and vCenter combination of VCF, the network what I showed is pretty standard, right? You have VLAN, port groups and everything for ESX, vMotion, vSAN and host. Those are very standard, right? Look at the right-hand side. If you have a management cluster or management domain where your vCenter live, now you really wanted to have a VCF automation to go deploy a workload, then you need to do certain things. So VCF, all the management components are in management network. However, I have showed you a supervisor management network. So that's a piece where VCF automation require two things. One is supervisor enablement on our vSphere plus a VPC. So you have same network fabric. You connect to same network fabric with VPC, right? And you can deploy supervisor management either in VPC or in your management network. And then your workloads, anything you do on a VM or container or whatever you want to deploy, that can go under a VPC based network. And VCF automation can consume that part of that VPC. Okay, that's one. Another one, now everybody understands management domain and workload domain. Now this is the model of management domain and workload domain. Now you have two clusters. One is management domain and workload is in a workload domain, right? Workload clusters. So management domain, you can see everything is related to management components, right? On the right hand side, when you say workload domain, that is where you basically creating your network for VCF automation to consume. So in this example, same thing, we have two active and standby edges, NSX edge, right? That placed when you go, we made a very simplification process on VCF 9. Today, when you consume the VCF automation, you can do a NSX deployment an edge through vCenter itself. You can go to the tab, network connectivity, and you can directly deploy there. So let's say we deploy active standby edges, and that edges lives on one particular network, right? And we also introduce NSX VPC on a workload domain, right? And that again peering to your transit gateway and T0 network, and then basically it's peering your upstream network. You can do BGP, you can do SATIP, the way you're doing today. But the concept what we're trying to say is you can segregate those things part of your workload domain architecture, right? Where your customer is going to deploy the workloads in that workload domain construct, okay? So let's talk about another one. So now you have a requirement that I wanted to have my VCF automation deployment exposing to outside of public network, right? So most of the time you'll do that because you are a provider admin or your tenant, they are maybe coming from a public network, right? They are VPNing in or maybe directly coming to that portal which is giving self-service portal, right? There are a few things you can do today, right? You can bring a load balancer, you can also do a WAF rules, policies and everything. Or you can also have a multiple segments on NSX. That's where we introduce VPC, right? That's an overlay. That VPC, multiple VPCs, right now you can see there is a DMG VPC and there is a management app VPC, right? Each VPC will have a subnet, right? And they are coming from your VPC, which is basically managing your network flow. So what you can do is you can create certain policies when it is hitting your load balancer, the traffic can go to which direction, right? Let's say I am a tenant admin, I wanted to go to a VCF automation, particular workload to access, subnet is 192.168 something. You can create a policy on that VPC level, and you can also bring in DFW, right? Another layer of protection, right? Those segregation you can do on this design where VCF automation can allow you to do that to more secure and compliance and more granular availability around your design. Similarly, I'll talk about orchestrator. This is again same thing, same VPC construct. Why I'm saying VPC? Because it's give you a more flexibility around your network. You can spin off quickly and creating an architecture which is scalable and easily or immediately you can do that with an overlay with the VPC. So now think about this way. This is another use case, like you have a org A and org B. Org A also required a orchestrator dedicated to them, and org B also required a orchestrator for their workload automation. So now the given example here is, if I have an org A and org B, different, they may be in a different network as well. So now I wanted to protect those because they should not talk to each other, right? So that's where we are bringing in certain dedicated VPC for each org, right? And they are all going through same TGW and T0s, but however, we are bringing in DFW firewalls and everything. You can protect those policies on your logically on a VPC level. Okay, so these are some concepts, these are some designs. We have a very good design document. If you have never seen it, I would recommend go and look at it. That's have an end-to-end architecture and the details around all this design what I'm showing today. Okay, now let's talk about How much time I have? 18 minutes? Wait, okay. So I have to wrap up because I'll take some questions. Okay. Now take a look, few things. I'll just go one or two. So now, Stephen and I covered a lot of things around how it looks on in architecture and design standpoint. Let's take a look at end-to-end view, right? Your customer deploys a workload. You have a management domain on the left-hand side. You have a VCF automation, which is a workload domain is basically where your workload is. You have a supervisor construct we mentioned. We have a vSphere cluster. Now you have a single organization. Very simple, right? This is how it looks like as an end-to-end network standpoint, right? You have a TGW, you have one VPC is managing multiple subnets, and that each subnet has one network, and in the network is basically nothing but giving to a VM and container whatever you're running on supervisor. That's very simple, right? So everything is routed through VPC, it goes to TGW, and TGW basically peers with T0, okay? That's one organization, simple. Now take a look on multiple organization. On same infrastructure, nothing changes, right? Same infrastructure, now I have two organizations. One organization, I showed you how exactly is the blue and green. So blue has a one project, it associated to one TGW, which is basically dedicated to that, and then one VPC dedicated to that blue, and then I have a simple network coming from VPC, and then my VM runs on that, right? Now if I have another one, green one coming, right? I wanted to use same T0. I have not changed anything. My architecture still remains same. I just introduced quickly provision a TGW for that organization, associated to another new VPC dedicatedly, and then I create a subnets. So both of them are running on same infrastructure. However, there's a logical separation, end-to-end granular segregation around the infrastructure layer as well as on a VCF automation and using NSX VPC. So this is kind of giving a view of how everything looks in a context of VCF automation. I'll not go through this slide. I will recommend that this is another like more granular, like if you have multiple workload domain, you wanted to grow cross sites, you know, and how you wanted to go more detail around this. So we have this in a design guide. I will recommend that take a look, okay? Because we have only 5 minutes left, I will take some questions and if we can answer those. Sorry. Okay. Any questions we can answer so far? I know this is a lot, but yeah.
So what is the consumption from a customer's perspective? So, for instance, our customers that are used to consuming cloud resources, they like to use Terraform. Terraform is a very good tool, right? Is there a Terraform provider for VCF?
Yes.
Is it how robust is it? Is it fully developed? You know, I mean that's we have good functionality. Or is the customer forced to use a GUI, which isn't really optimal because people want to do infrastructure as code, right?
Yeah, I can answer that. We have a Terraform provider for VCF, and specifically, we have a Terraform provider for VCF automation. I'm meeting with some folks to establish some end-to-end Terraform flows that we're going to publish, to demonstrate that in addition to the point examples that are in the repository today. But, our philosophy is infrastructure as code is the way that you do these things at scale with Git, DevOps, et cetera. And that's our objective, is to have that experience with VCF automation.
Yeah.
Will there be a guide on converting cloud directory infrastructure to VCF?
Yes.
Yeah. So the question is there a guide in converting Cloud Director into VCF automation? The answer is yes, there's going to be a guide. There's actually a migration feature in the upcoming next version of VCF automation, which you as a Cloud Director admin can point the new VCF automation at your Cloud Director instances, and you can tell it what you want to migrate. You can migrate it at a very granular level with infrastructure, with tenants, within a tenant, like all of that. It's an in-product feature that we're developing. And since I'm the VCD architect and the VCF automation architect, I kind of make sure everything is glued together and works the way it's supposed to and the way VCD was meant to work in the new world.
Any more questions? Yeah. Go ahead.
Continuing on that, will that require new hardware or will it?
So the migration is for your users. They're going to have to change how they work, but the workloads don't actually move. You adopt the existing hardware, the existing footprint, and those workloads stay where they are. There's a question back here.
It supports both.
Automation, you provide access to certain user groups based on project. Let's say make the project result. So you said we'll have operations which can actually see visibility into this, right? How do you transfer that access restriction that you defined here?
So the question is, how do we make sure VCF operations is aware of the tenancy model and in particular the fine-grained authorization model that we have in VCF automation? Fancy engineering. So we actually made engineering changes both on the operation side as well as the VCF automation side in order to allow the kind of fine-grained metrics analysis that an individual tenant user needs in order to understand their workloads. And so there's some technology, we've changed APIs, we've introduced identity tokens and so on to make sure that when a VCF automation user interacts with operations through VCF automation, VCF operations understands that this is the user, or these are the things that that user has access to, and only those things.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then other thing is if you want to do billing and chargeback and everything, right? That's also integrated with the VCF operation capability.
Other questions?